breaking news. The U.S. Navy launches a blockade of Iran's ports as oil explodes past $100. Trump slams Pope Leo as terrible for foreign policy, and Hungary's Orbán era crushed in shocking landslide. Greetings, humanity. Today is Monday, April 13th, 2026. Let's grok the news. I'm Robert Gardner, using GROK, the most truthful AI in the world, each weekday to help me search and summarize the biggest headlines in the news today. You also get the unparalleled benefit of this observer's opinions. Now, let's grok the most important story in the world today, starting with our lead story, Dateline, Washington, D.C., and the Strait of Hormuz. The United States is moving to enforce a naval blockade of Iranian ports and shipping traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, with operations set to begin within hours after high-stakes peace talks in Islamabad collapsed without agreement. President Trump confirmed the measure, stating the U.S. will block ships from Iranian ports following Iran's rejection of terms, as oil prices surged past $100 a barrel amid the ongoing conflict. Vice President Vance noted that Iran chose not to accept the offered terms during the marathon negotiations. The blockade raises immediate risks to global energy supplies, with the Strait of Hormuz handling a significant portion of the world's oil shipments. International reactions have been swift and divided. British Prime Minister Starmer announced the UK will not join the U.S. efforts, while tanker operators were urged not to pay any Iranian tolls for passage. Oil benchmarks jumped sharply, with the U.S. benchmark rising 8% after the failed talks. The development comes against a backdrop of continued tensions, including recent U.S.-Israeli actions in Iran and a near blackout of Internet access inside the country, now entering its 45th day. Analysts warn of potential wider global disruption to energy markets and shipping. The White House has also issued possible consequences for NATO allies, perceived as not fully supporting efforts related to the Iran conflict. This escalation marks a significant shift from diplomacy to direct maritime enforcement as the U.S. presses its position on Iran's nuclear program and regional activities. Markets reacted immediately, stocks falling as investors priced in higher energy costs and supply chain risks. The move leaves several predicaments unchanged despite the military pressure, according to some observers. Iran has condemned the blockade, of course, as illegal and an act of piracy. As enforcement begins, the world watches closely for any direct confrontations or ripple effects on everything from freight costs to inflation worldwide. The situation remains fluid, with potential for further diplomatic maneuvering, even as the naval assets are positioned. We briefly review a roundup of the most critical reports in the world right after this. M.S. Gardner, my wife, is author of last year's Moon Meridian Prize winner from April Gloaming Publishing, Wolf's Bane, a dark, serious, modern take on an old fairy tale. You've never heard Little Red Riding Hood told quite like this. It might not put you down because you won't be putting it down. A mature Southern Gothic story for adults. Wolf's Bane, available now at thecuriousauthor.com. All one word, thecuriousauthor.com. Now we grok the headlines from around the world. Dateline Budapest. Opposition leader Péter Magyar and his TISA party delivered a landslide victory in Hungary's parliamentary elections, sweeping away Viktor Orbán's long-dominant Fidesz party after 16 years in power. Orbán conceded defeat in what many are calling the end of an era, with the result expected to improve Hungary's strained ties with the European Union and potentially influencing U.S. conservative politics. Well, this observer is amazed at the Western world's amazing ability to ignore reality and to pursue the very leftist goals and policies that are destroying the greatest civilization in history. It makes him wonder about the upcoming American midterms. Dateline Washington, D.C. and California. Democratic Congressman Eric Swalwell has suspended his campaign for California governor after accusations of sexual assault from multiple former staffers, including over 50 calling for his resignation. Reports also surfaced of a recorded denial at the mansion of a donor linked to the so-called honey trapper involved. Swalwell has denied the allegations. And by the way, it was an accident that this observer called the state California instead of California. That was really a slip of the tongue. Dateline, Washington, D.C. and the Vatican. President Trump sharply attacked Pope Leo XIV, describing him as weak on crime and terrible for foreign policy, after the pontiff criticized aspects of the U.S.-Israeli actions in Iran and appealed for peace. Trump said that he does not want a pope who believes it is acceptable for Iran to possess a nuclear weapon. Meanwhile, Pope Leo has launched his first major international trip with a visit to Algeria to honor St. Augustine and to highlight the world's fastest-growing Catholic region across Africa. The 10-day tour underscores the Vatican's focus on the continent's expanding faith community. But this observer does find it ironic that the Pope is presently honoring the very saint that introduced the doctrine of a just war after his foreign policy speech denouncing that very doctrine. Dateline, Augusta, Georgia. Northern Ireland's Rory McIlroy became the first golfer in 24 years to win consecutive Masters titles, defending his championship in a tense final round at Augusta National and joining legends Tiger Woods, Jack Nicklaus, and Nick Faldo as a repeat winner. Dateline Houston, if you hadn't heard by now, those 4 NASA astronauts of the Artemis II mission safely splashed down in the Pacific Ocean after a 10-day journey around the moon, completing a historic uncrewed to crewed stepping stone test. That means that we're sending human beings back to space and back to the moon. The crew, including pilot Victor Glover, was welcomed back in Houston as the agency prepares for future lunar landings and a big moon base one day. Looking forward to that. It was a great splashdown, by the way, but the process seemed quaint, antique, almost primitive compared to SpaceX landing with rockets roaring and blasting. They haven't tried that with a live crew, however, so I think NASA might be forgiven. Dateline Nigeria. At least 100 civilians were killed and many more injured after a Nigerian Air Force operation mistakenly bombed a crowded village market in what officials described as a misfire. The incident has drawn widespread concern over military operations in the region. Dateline USA, singer Britney Spears has voluntarily checked herself into a treatment facility following her most recent arrest for driving under the influence. The pop star's move comes as she seeks support amid ongoing personal challenges. Isn't this child star in her 40s by now? Dateline, Washington, D.C. A former award-winning Washington Post journalist has pleaded guilty in a U.S. Department of Justice case involving child pornography charges, marking a significant development in the federal prosecution. Dateline Ghana. Ghana professional footballer Dominic Frimpong was killed in an armed attack on the team bus of Baricum, Chelsea, shocking the local sports community and raising safety concerns for athletes in that country. Dateline India. Legendary Bollywood playback singer Asha Bhosle, aged 92, made a final humble public appearance at a wedding that quickly went viral before her reported passing at the age of 92. Crowds have gathered ahead of her funeral as tributes pour in for the iconic voice of Indian cinema. Dateline New York City. A suspect who identified himself as Lucifer slashed 3 people in a random attack at New York City's busy Grand Central Station before himself being shot and taken into custody by police. This observer would be amazed to find this criminally insane or demonized individual did not have a record that should have had him behind bars or in an institution long ago. This observer would love to be found wrong about that, but is pretty sure he won't be. Dateline the USA, the home of OpenAI CEO Sam Altman, not mentioning where that is exactly. Well, that was struck by gunfire just days after an alleged Molotov cocktail attack on the same property, prompting increased security concerns around high-profile tech figures. This observer has a notion that as AI becomes a greater catalyst for sweeping economic change and dislocation, that the high-tech industry and their leaders will be under ever greater scrutiny and will be the target of ever greater social malice. Dateline London. The British government is advancing legislation that could align the UK with certain EU single market rules, a move that has sparked debate over post-Brexit economic relations with Europe. This observer thinks Brexit was a great idea at the time, and it's just too bad the British government refused to try it. But they clearly serve their central bank globalist masters on the continent. Too bad they don't serve the people of the UK. And Dateline Juneau, Alaska. The Alaskan Senate has approved legislation that would permit the installation of safe haven baby boxes, allowing parents to anonymously surrender newborns at designated safe locations without legal penalty. And this observer approves of that pro-life policy, for what that's worth. But I thank you for listening. Please join me tomorrow to once again grok the news. I'm Robert Gardner. Godspeed and God bless.